Okay. Maybe we start with the first slide. Yeah, perfect. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our second book launch for Socioecological Transformations book. We are waiting and still admitting more participants to the launch. And as we are starting, let me introduce you the book launch that we had last month, which is now published on the website of the project, Just Globe Project. And we are very excited that now we are having the second part of the book launch today, and it will also be published on the project website, Just Globe Project. So the first part of the book launch delved into questions of how the transformation of the self connects to the transformation, the broader transformations. And we looked at different ontologies and how we understand transformations through different ontological lenses. That was quite a deep dive into the personal and into the different ontologies. And today we are shifting our focus to the institutional aspect, to the structural change, and how can we really think of socio-ecological transformations through the changes in the institutions, in the systems, and through the collectives, through the movements. We have an amazing line of speakers today who are not only talking the walk, but also walking the walk. And they're going to give us some insights from their amazing work. And let's get into it without further delay. But we wanted to note that today's session, like before, is recorded. And we will have today this kind of structure, as you see here. We will start with the opening seats from our contributors, the contributors to the book. They will give us 1 minute takeaways, lessons, or what we like to call seeds that they want us to take with from their contributions. This will be very short, 1 minute, and then we will jump into more detailed, more focused discussions. We will have 3 clusters, 3, let's say, panels, and each panel, as you see, touches upon the broader theme: practicing alternatives, regeneration and transformation, rethinking sectors and systems, and policy justice and alliances. In each panel, we will have speakers that are talking about their chapter for 6 to 7 minutes, and we will have 5-minute discussions between the contributors. And after these 3 panels, we are hoping that as the audience, you will be keeping your questions aside and then taking a note of your questions. And in the final collective reflection and audience exchange session, we will have hopefully time to receive your questions and have a general discussion. So without further ado, let's start with the seats. And Ashish has a video. The first seat will come to you in a video format.
I have to now shift in between the presentations because video is, of course, separately.
Yes, of course.
Listingly doesn't show here. Oh, mine. Small second. I will open it from here.
Yes, it's not always easy to shift from one presentation to video. So
Sorry, this doesn't work as I planned. If I share my this and then I open from here. Do you see now well?
What I see is a frozen screen, but how about the others?
Yeah, the
Does
same.
anyone?
Green saying RS.
The white screen.
Okay, maybe try again. And something is happening. Okay. See the video down there. Yeah, perfect. Yes. Let's check the sound.
Right. Thank you, Ashish. I will now go back to the presentation, and we have the second seed by Jai and Ketaki. I'll share their slide. Let's just move, please. Ketaki, can you please go into your seat? Thank you.
Sorry, the sound was not there in my seat. So can I just speak to it, or should we just go ahead?
I had the sound.
Oh, we didn't hear. I was thinking you're.
No, we didn't. We didn't hear anything.
Should we go back? It was just very.
No, it's okay. We don't need to go back, but I can just explain it in 10 seconds, maybe. So
Yes, that'd be great. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for showing that. So that's actually kind of an animated depiction of doodles that we've done, which try and show how humans can reintegrate within and with the rest of nature. Because over the last 200-300 years, we have actually, through a certain form of Western modernity, got separated, or we think of ourselves as being separate from nature, and that's part of the crisis that we're in. So that's just an attempt to kind of show how we can re-establish landscapes and seascapes in which humans are one of many, many, many millions of species, and how we can re-establish peace and coexistence with the rest of nature. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashish. You should be saying now, seeing the co-production of knowledge formation of a team of artisanal fishermen. So this is the slide from the Ketaki and Jai's chapter. So if you could, Ketaki, give us your 1 minute sharing with us what you want to share. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so our paper really looked at the co-production of knowledge, which was done with the community. So it focused on bringing out about transformation, which is more bottom up, and using the traditional knowledge of the fishing community to foster this transformation. Yeah. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Perfect.
And
Thank you.
And we continue with Galina and Eva.
Or is it me, Sara, who's...
No.
Yes, it's Galina and Eva, but we don't have a slide, so I will just keep this one. Apologies for that,
Okay,
that I don't
okay.
start to stop sharing and sharing. So if you don't mind, thank you.
Yeah, it's a beautiful slide. So can you hear me now? Yeah, thank you. It's really nice to be here. I will give the 1 minute, and then Eva and I will continue with the 6 to 7 minutes when the time is. So our chapter emerges from an observation very similarly to what Ashish kind of referred to previously, that to focus on biodiversity in farming it really calls for attention and requires understanding diversification of labor and means of livelihoods. So biodiversity is a human-made concept, and yet humans are absent from the definition of biodiversity, but also from examinations of biological diversity. So our chapter tries to weave these understandings together to bring human livelihoods and in particular farming livelihoods as part of intrinsic understanding of biological diversity as well. So these are not separated, but connected, interconnected. And we use ecological livelihoods as an analytical concept to do this. So this is a tiny teaser to the chapter.
Wonderful. And thanks for keeping to the 1 minute limit. That's great. And let's move on to the next seat. Sarah Holmgren.
Yes, thank you. Well, this illustration, Forest Eye, it's called, by Mia Fernau. I think it very well represents our chapter. The chapter, Looking Around for a Livable Forest Future, is part of a research project called Shadow Forests, where we explore alternative ways of seeing, relating to, and managing Swedish forests. And this chapter, I think, should be read as an invitation to a further exploration of what a forestry underpinned by a rationality of care, responsibility, and solidarity could look like, and how cultural shifts could come about leading in such direction. Thank you.
Wonderful, Sarah. Thank you. And we have Vilka and Yolanda. Their seat, please.
Thank you. The chapter that we have proposed for this book is kind of stemming from kind of the imaginary of degrowth and how the idea of degrowth, the proposal of degrowth as a framework, as a set of practices, as a kind of a reset of imaginaries around that leads to wider scale societal transformation, can be not only theoretically expanded upon, but can be mobilized by a social movement. Because it's not that frequent that such a mobilization framework that emerges very much in the global north is actually used by social movements. And this chapter explains the way touristic degrowth, or decreixement turístic, as we say in Catalan, is actually used and mobilized in very kind of extensive terms in the context of struggles for tourism degrowth in the context of Barcelona. I'll leave it there.
Perfect, thank you.
Wonderful.
So I believe my turn, and I on purpose kept this nicer slide here while Vilka was talking, which is much nicer than mine, just with a lot of text. So this is a first seed for the chapter 13. And where I basically want to highlight how the use of language of transformations is, or the tendency to use the language of transformations without actually changing anything. So change without change. And this chapter calls us to pay attention to how transformation language is misused, unused, and misused, and to insist on pathways where justice is not optional but foundational. So yeah, we see in the EU bioeconomy policy, which this chapter focuses on, we see that the language of even degrowth and decoloniality, even not maybe in the final document, not definitely in the final policies and strategies, but it's used in a discursive, informal spaces, but it's really framed through the competitiveness, techno-scientific optimism, growth, and so on. So we see nature becoming, well, not becoming, but definitely being kept as seen as a resource base, as a strategic asset, and justice is only an afterthought. And then the stage 2 is for the final chapter, the concluding one. So I guess what I could bring out from this one is that the argument that the future of, or the transformations basically lie not in the perfect consensus, but in learning how to work together without erasing differences. So it's a lot about the pluriverse, and how to work with some principles of care and nurturing care and solidarity in order not to dominate others, in that kind of eagerness to, yes, do right thing, we can reproduce the same violences, right? So yeah, it's an invitation again to practice the skill of nurturing that space of care in immediate and everywhere spaces where we show up in our different roles and our different capacities. So the courage that requires, the courage not to only resist the system, but to do so, the systems of harm, but to do so while nurturing connection across differences and becoming aware of our own complicities and our biases in the process. Okay. So
Thank you. Thank you, Sabeta. That's very rich, and we have a lot of seeds to take with us, and of course they will continue to be watered during our conversations today. So we'll start with the first panel, with this short panel that is titled Practicing Alternatives, Regeneration and Transformation. So Ashish Kothari is our first speaker today, and the title of the contribution is Radical Ecological Democracy and Tapestry of Alternatives. Ashish Kothari, if I may briefly introduce, is a founder member, Kalpav Rikish, and is involved in many people's movements in India, and I'm guessing beyond. So welcome, Ashish, and we are happy to listen to your contribution.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for this opportunity. Is my voice clear? Okay, thanks a lot. Can we get to my slides? I will certainly try and finish in 7 minutes. Maybe take a leaf out of Sabahita, who takes slightly longer. Okay, so basically, I mean, I think I'll quickly go through the first few slides there. We all know that we're in multiple intersecting crises, from very local to very global. I don't think I need to explain these. We're all familiar with them. Next, please. I actually was wishing I could do this myself, but I'll have to keep saying next. Realizing that we're in all of these different kind of crises, obviously the most important question for us as human beings is, are there alternatives? We all have needs, we have aspirations as human beings. How do we meet them? Can we meet them in ways that are not destructive to the rest of nature and creating all these other crises that I mentioned in the first slide? Next. And when we think about alternatives, there are basically sort of two kinds that we look at, especially in the global south. One is resistance. For instance, this particular image is from about 40 years back of a indigenous movement against big dams in central India. And to me, what was most interesting was not just the protest against displacement and dispossession, but also the articulation that this river, which for the government was a commodity, for us, she's our mother. And you see in this kind of articulation, next slide, very different forms of the kind of cosmology. Next slide, please. Kind of cosmologies that we see in different protest movements or resistance movements around the world. But then complementing these, please keep clicking. Complementing these are also constructive alternatives, which is where people are trying to generate for themselves livelihoods, basic needs, and beyond. Also, more equitable forms of decision making, gender justice, and so on. I know of many, of course, from India, but in the next slide, we'll see also that there are thousands across the world. And through many global networks, we've been trying to understand what are these transformations that people are trying on the ground, and what are the sorts of frameworks that are emerging from them, which could be presented as robust frameworks and visions of which are alternatives to the currently dominant systems of development, capitalism, patriarchy, and so on. Next, please. So obviously we won't have the time here to go into examples. My chapter does give a lot of these examples and give some descriptions of what's happening. Next slide. But what's emerging from these examples is what we here in India have sort of come up with over the last decade or so, but now it's being used in many parts of the world. Kind of tool of understanding that we call the flower of transformation, where we're seeing fundamental systemic changes and transformations happening at political, economic, social, cultural, and ecological levels. For instance, with the political, the argument that democracy is not so much about going to elections and trying to vote a good government into power, but much more about claiming power on the ground where we are, as indigenous peoples, as local communities, as urban neighborhoods, wherever we are and whatever collectives we are. That's the real meaning of democracy, and it's called different things in different parts of the world. The same thing with, of course, reclaiming our control over the economy. And then if you look at the sort of core of this flower of transformation, the most important learnings that many of us have come to from these different examples all over the world. Next slide. Is ethics, values, and principles, which in a sense also binds together the different, very, very diverse, very different, very unique examples all over the world of radical transformation. It is, for instance, if you look at the fourth bullet point here, it's more about cooperation than competition. It's more about the commons than about privatization. Or if you look at the fourth last bullet point in red, it's not just the rights of humans, but also the rights of the rest of nature, which I gave in my short seed earlier. So if you were to sort of put these sorts of values and ethics and principles together, what we come up with is worldviews that celebrate not power, fame, and money, but life. And that flips things around very significantly. Next slide. One of these sorts of frameworks or visions that emerges from ancient India and has come back in recent movements is what we call Swaraj, which means self-rule. And we say eco-Swaraj, which is to say that we're all decision makers wherever we are on the ground in our collectives. But as we take decisions, we are also responsible to the well-being of other human beings and to other species, the whole planet. So it's a very simple concept, radical ecological democracy, but of course, much more complex when we talk about how to practice it on the ground. Next slide. And there are, of course, similar frameworks and worldviews from many parts of the world, some very ancient from indigenous peoples and other local communities, which are coming back in current struggles. Some major reinterpretations of major religions, which have otherwise become extremely dogmatic and hierarchical, but sort of reinterpretations of how to bring back fundamental spirituality in them. And then things emerging from, let's say, the belly of the beast, from within capitalist society, such as degrowth, ecofeminism, and so on. Next slide. So one question that often gets asked, and I'll end in the next couple of minutes, is, okay, you have these thousands of examples all over the world, but how do you reach scale? How do you actually challenge the macro political and economic structures that are bearing down on us? And here, for me, what's important is not upscaling, which is something becomes bigger and bigger and bigger because it's successful, but rather outscaling, which is thousands of these examples, learning from each other, creating more new ones, encouraging new ones, and then networking horizontally to create scale. And that's actually beginning to happen in the ecological movement, in the agroecology movement. Of course, it's been happening in the feminist movement, the decolonial movement for a long, long time. So there's no central structure. It's very horizontal. It's non-hierarchical, but it creates actually macro scale through that. That's what the hope is. Just quickly at the end to mention one such example of trying to help with this kind of outscaling is something we launched 6 years back called the Global Tapestry of Alternatives, connecting movements of radical transformation across different parts of the world. In particular, we started with Colombia, Mexico, South Africa, South Asia, Southeast Asia, but now more and more are getting connected. And the idea is really to collaborate, to share, to constructively critique, to do joint actions, to joint visioning of what kind of world we want, and then what are the steps to take towards that. Next slide. So there's many different things that the Global Tapestry does in terms of weaving these different processes together, documentation, dialogues, and so on. Next slide. And for instance, as an example, when I mentioned about radical politics transformations, We've done 3 confluences, physical confluences on radical democracy autonomy, where people are trying to reclaim power on the ground, but to do it in ways that are responsible to the rest of the planet, to the rest of nature, and to each other, something that we also call earthy governance. Next slide. This process also is doing probably the world's first global sort of meta map on radical alternatives in different parts of the world. It's still very early stages, but there's a lot more that's actually going into multiple, and it's an interactive map. It's open source. Next slide. So I think basically, that's it from me. There's a lot more information on these websites, which you can look at. I hope I've stuck to my time. Thanks a lot for this opportunity again, and I look forward to hearing the my other colleagues in the panel. Thank you.
Thank you indeed, Ashish. You provided us quite a language and quite full of examples to talk with and think with. And thanks for keeping, of course, also the time. And let's move on to Ketaki Tare. And Ketaki is an architect and urban designer at Bombay 61 Studio in Mumbai, India. The floor is yours, Ketaki.
Thank you so much, Yassine. Just a second. I will just. Yeah. Hello, everyone. I am Ketki, and along with Jay Bhargavkar, Seena Mube, Laila Mehta, and Shivaji Bose, I'm the co-author of this chapter on transformative bottom-up urban planning. This work is situated in Versova, Kolivada, which is a traditional fishing settlement in coastal Mumbai, and draws from our long-term engagement through the Tapestry project. Next, please. So this chapter is part of the Tapestry project, as I mentioned, which is short for Transformation as Praxis, which is exploring socially just and transdisciplinary pathways to sustainability in marginal environments. So this project explored how socially just and ecologically sound transformations can emerge from below, especially in marginal environments, experiencing climate and development pressures. Tapestry works it worked across 3 patches of transformation, where we looked at the coastal Mumbai, the Kutch, and the Sundarbans, which was both India and Bangladesh coastal Sundarbans. These are the regions where climate change and uncertainty and governance challenges converge. Next, please. So our chapter focuses on the Mumbai patch, looking closely at one fishing community, which is at Versova, Kolivada, as shown in the map. Mumbai is a low-lying coastal megacity, which is historically built through land reclamation and now extremely vulnerable to sea level rise and flooding. The Kolis are traditional small-scale fishers and are recognized as Mumbai's original inhabitants. Their livelihoods are deeply tied to creeks, the mangroves, wetlands, and this. Next, please. But these coastal commons are under severe pressure, which is due to the pollution in creeks like the Malad Creek and the Versova Creek, along which the settlement is located. There are real estate and infrastructure projects on the coast that are ongoing. Then there is also a lot of degradation of mangroves and fish, which are the fish breeding grounds, which is because of which the fishing has become very less viable, especially for poorer coolies and women who depend on the creek. So what's at stake is not just the ecology, but also the livelihoods, identity, and cultural continuity. In this chapter, we draw on the idea of transformation as praxis, change, that is the change that comes through a constant dialogue between knowledge and practice, and through self-conscious collective action. Next. We treat here transformation as not just a purely technical fix, but as innovation and experimentation, empowerment and social equity, which is also bottom up and reflexive process that negotiates power structures and imagines different futures. So co-production for us isn't only about experts working with communities. It's about recognizing the embodied emotional and tacit knowledges, which are usually invisible in formal planning. Next. We draw on the idea of transformation as praxis, a process that combines critique of existing systems with collective and grounded action. Here, communities are not just passive beneficiaries, but active agents shaping how change happens. So, where we looked at these four steps of transformation, which included some mapping and action projects with a focus on participation. Next. Our work is rooted in co-production of knowledge. This means valuing the poly-ecological knowledge, that is the fishing community's knowledge, their lived experience and everyday practices alongside technical and academic inputs as well. Next, please. One of the key moments of our participatory exercises was the ideation workshop that we conducted in 2019 at Warsaw with IIT Bombay. Fishers, the women, youth, and community leaders were part of this workshop, and they identified key concerns which were revolving around pollution, loss of livelihoods, climate uncertainty, and access to the commons. Next.
Just to say that you have 2 minutes left.
Yes, yes. Thank you. Mangroves are crucial buffers and fish breeding grounds. So there was certain mapping involving the elders, artists, and ecologists. We mapped the historical mangrove laws and advocated the protection. Next. We also conducted participatory mapping exercises along with the elders, where we use their narratives to build these kind of maps to understand the loss of biodiversity that has happened over a period of time. Next, please. We also looked at one community-led response, which was the installation of the net filters, which was inspired by the traditional fishing technique of dole fishing nets. Next. These dole fishing nets were placed at creek inlets as filter traps for plastic waste without blocking the fish movement. Next, please. At the creek outlet where we had installed it, it managed to gather 500 kg of waste in just 3 days. And this could be approach seen as something that could be scaled up and used for multiple, for the community benefit. Next, please. We also used another method of photo voice to foreground the issues of the community, where we looked at the youth, women's work, youth aspirations, cultural memory, and everyday negotiations with urban change. Next, please. Uh, a, a young a young fisherman told us, if our community unites and gets support, artisanal fishing can rise again. And these voices show that transformation is about dignity, identity, and integration, intergenerational futures, and not just infrastructure. So we looked at, just to end our presentation, I would just like to add that we saw these initiatives not as solutions that fix everything, but as patches of transformation, grounded experiments that help us reimagine cities like Mumbai. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tare. And you brought us again a very rich and series of rich examples to think with throughout today. So let's move to Galina Kallio and Eva Holtbecker's presentation. Their contribution is titled Small Scale Farming and Ecological Livelihoods. And let me introduce you very briefly. Galina is an environmental social scientist working in Ruralia Institute as an academic research fellow and an adjunct professor of sustainable economy at the University of Helsinki, Finland. And Eva is a UEF fellow at the School of Humanities, University of Eastern Finland, and an adjunct professor of sustainable entrepreneurship at the University of Helsinki in Finland. Yes, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So wonderful presentations before us, really energized by by amazing work that is really being done, I got into some other spheres. But now we're back to our presentation. And we thought with Eva that we are actually going to do something a bit different, because you can all go and read the chapter. And of course, we are happy to summarize it to you, but we rather maybe focus these 6 minutes on actually introducing the background for our collaboration and how we ended up sort of working together, and where does this chapter emerge from. What do you think, Eva?
Yes, let's do that.
Yes. Do you mind if I stop sharing so we have your faces closer, because this is only this slide, right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so as I mentioned previously, our chapter is about small-scale farming and smallholding and people striving for self-sufficiency in the global north, or in the so-called minority worlds. And just as a background, that it is only a fraction of people who actually earn their living through farming. It's less than 4% in Finland, and in Europe, it's even less. So we're speaking of a very marginal sort of community that Eva and I have worked with. And it's amazing to think, or it's incredible to think, that this is the community that somehow is supposed to feed us and themselves. So this is kind of what unites us. And we have both been doing our ethnographic fieldwork among these communities. They are a bit different. So my own sort of fieldwork has been among small-scale diversified farmers, such as biodynamic farmers, permacultural, agroecological, and farming communities practicing these ecological type of farming. And as the Ketaki you mentioned also in your presentation, what unites Eva's and my work has been that we have sort of been interested in the everyday lives of these people, which is not so common, because we both come from a background in business school, actually. So so it's been a bit of an unconventional approach that has brought us two together. And maybe Eva, you want to continue from this a bit?
Yes, thank you. So I, with my ethnographic work, ended up looking a variety of grassroots organizations and actors in Finland. This was a project from 2017 to 2022. These projects were related to various forms of getting by after growth, was the title of the project. And I, as part of this, I familiarized with and visited households striving for self-sufficiency. So people that want to not necessarily be, but strive towards food, warmth. In the north of Europe, there's winter still, we require the warmth, and housing, and then electricity independence. And this, while doing this work with these households and talking with them and the other initiatives, the role of non-monetary income became quite evident. So somehow being able to support oneself, the livelihoods of doing your own economy with others, obviously.
Yeah, and maybe here our kind of interest started to come together quite a lot, because also in the small-scale farming context, where I have worked since 2019 as part of several different projects, it became quite obvious that these farmers live quite outside the formal agricultural system, which is based on heavily subsidizing particular type of production, as well as assuming that a farmer would sell their whole produce to a wholesale or to one buyer as a bulk, which didn't happen. So there's a lot of struggles that we kind of identified or observed as part of the everyday lives of these farmers, how they actually live by, not only monetarily, but they sustain themselves through different kinds of exchanges through volunteer labor, through neighbor help, through communal help as well. And a lot of has to do with self-sufficiency, increasing self-sufficiency, so kind of income. And in the center of this, we were obviously interested that all of these people, they strive somehow to increase diversity of their landscapes somehow around them. And yeah, so this was kind of part of our interest to look into how the livelihoods necessarily are interconnected with their possibilities and impossibilities to work to increase biodiversity in their homes, in their gardens, in their farms.
And you have left?
Yes.
2 minutes. Okay.
And in relation to the diversity, I also wanted to mention forests, since and the landscape around this food production, which proved to be very important for the biodiversity aspect, and having the dialogue, if we want to call it that, the relations between the farm and the forest.
And because in Finland, agricultural fields are separated from the forests, it's also politically they're separated, even though in our cases they came really intimately together. So this is something we wanted to also open up. But maybe as a final note, we also wanted to share with you that our process of working together has been very much engaging in dialogues with each other, sharing what we kind of observe, how we engage in the everyday lives of these people that we study, what are the difficulties, what do we find, points of intersection, points of differences. And we wanted to bring this also partially to our chapter, which is that we kind of organized one part of it as a dialogue between us. And this is a method that we've also used previously, because we also believe that sometimes researchers don't necessarily allow themselves to explain how these processes emerge and how do we actually work together. So this is one way for us to try to do that, to actually represent that through the chapter as well. And we've used this method in our prior publications. And one last thing, that this is not, I don't think this is a separate chapter, but it's a continuum of our work. So there's it's it's a longer collaboration.
Thank you, Galina and Eva. And here I would really like to open the floor to 4 of you to see if you have any exchanges for each other, any comments for each other. But otherwise, I would like to just say that we have started listening from Ashish of resistance, and of course also the building of movements that are outscaling, which is a concept that I really, really liked, into movements inspiring and kind of inspiring other movements, and also from this, hearing this from Global South, also from Ketaki's presentation, how a bottom-up transformation that involves the researchers and the communities sort of collaboration together to map out the biodiversity, the possibilities of living in the times of crisis. And also from you and from Global North, from Finland, we have listened how researchers involve themselves into the transformation processes. So how do you see these lines of connection, and what kind of possibilities of solidarity, of connectedness emerge from these seemingly scattered, but of course essentially connected cases? And what else would you like to comment on each other's in 5 minutes? So this is just open for all of you. Whoever wants to go can go first, keeping in mind the time limit.
I have put the 5 minutes to go, so but we can still think. But I just wanted to mention also, if anyone from the rest of the presenters who haven't yet talked want to ask something from the 4 panelists?
Maybe I can just briefly say, and then I can leave the rest of the time for the others. What is sort of striking when we worked on the chapter was the fact that so little people are engaged with these essential jobs in global north, in Finland at least, and this food production. Whereas this is not the case for necessarily other parts of the world. And I think there's a lot to learn from this other parts of the world in where we are based. And I think this is one obvious connection in terms of this outscaling aspect.
Thank you.
Can I add something quickly?
Please go ahead. Yes.
Yeah. Thanks for this. Those were amazing presentations. I wish I could listen much more, but I'll certainly read the chapters. I thought a couple of things that sort of struck from all these very different and diverse experiences. One, the intersectionality of experiences. No, it's sometimes as either activists or researchers or researcher activists, we tend to focus on one aspect of the life of a community without necessarily understanding or trying to go into the other aspects. And I think it's very clear from the examples we heard that the ecological basis for transformation is closely connected to the political and the economic, and of course the social and cultural. And I think bringing out that kind of intersectionality, it happens as part of life anyway. But for us, for those of us who are working with communities or within communities, to bring that out much more sharply for ourselves, and sometimes actually even for themselves. So sometimes when we work with communities, not that they're also always recognizing these intersections or the complex connections that they make within their own life, but also what's coming from outside them. So that's something. And then the second quickly is that maybe the breaking down this dualism between an activist, a practitioner, and a researcher. We tend to think of these in silos, which they're not. And the more people like us can actually break down those categories and become all of them in support of what communities are trying to do on the ground, I think the more those transformations will be possible. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ashish. And Galina?
Yes, thank you. I mean, I relate so much to what has been said, and thank you, Ashish, for this. It resonates a lot. What I wanted to add is that another observation that arose during writing this chapter, and it has become more and more strong as I continue my work with the same communities that I started already in 2019, and it's been a privilege to be able to continue this work for such a long time because it's not to take for granted, is that I see a tremendous disempowerment and inability to participate in activism from the part of the grassroots organizing because they are so burned out and taxed with their everyday life survival basically, and to allow themselves to live this way and earn their livelihoods is very laborious, and there is their struggles are there. So as researchers, we are quite privileged in our position, or I feel at least so, because we receive our daily salary and we can do and be activists among, the grassroots in a way. But at the same time, it's a very complex or ambiguous position to be in. And I feel this activist, practitioner, researcher, and breaking the categories, but in reality and in practice, in the everyday life, I don't know how to do it. It's very difficult because the modes of being a researcher and the modes of being in the field an activist, they're so different that my body doesn't align them. And it's just a question, like an opening to everyone, like how to actually achieve that. And no one pays for you being a research activist. That's the reality, at least here in Finland. So yeah, so I'm happy to join forces if there is Yeah.
Thank you, Galina. Yes, Sabaeta, go ahead, please.
If I may, just to say that from the boring job of keeping the time, we just finished the 5 minutes, but please feel free if you want anything to add. For instance, Ketaki, if you want to comment, you're more than welcome. And then we can move on with Vilka and then Sarah.
Sure, thank you. No, I'll just add a very quick comment that through our work, I think we have also realized that that the importance of looking at these communities as custodians of nature has been foregrounded a lot in terms of, because what happened, like I would like to take the example of the city of Mumbai, particularly in this case, where we thought that, mangroves or the coastal areas are often looked at as or even the mangroves specifically in Mumbai have been classified as forests. But then how do we really look at the connections of the communities with the commons like these, and how can they be brought up or can be seen playing a role as somebody who is guarding these assets of the city is something that we really observed when we used to work with the communities, because most all of these coastal areas that we worked around with in Kutch also and in Sundarbans as well, the need to look at the communities as custodians of nature has always been foregrounded. In terms of how do you bring balance between conserving the natural resources or preserving them versus how do you have certain minimal human intervention, which is also required for the maintenance of these natural bodies. I think that is one of the debates that we have come across a lot while working with these communities, and which is very interesting to see through others' works as well, where we are all trying to foreground these knowledge systems. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ketaki. This is very great addition to the conversation, thinking of the communities as the custodians of nature. Thank you for this contribution. So with that, let's move to the next panel, our mini panel. It's on rethinking sectors and systems. And for technological convenience, let's start with Filka first, if it's okay with you, Sarah. And Filka Sekova is a senior researcher at the Department of Economic History at the University of Barcelona. And here, please, floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Saba and all the rest. And it's been indeed very inspiring to kind of to go and to hear the stories behind all these chapters and actually the embodied realities that they represent. Just a quick question. Do you see my screen well?
Yes, but not in the presentation mode. So just if you do the presentation mode.
Yes, I will do that. Just give me a second. Presentation mode.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Yes. All right. So what I wanted to start this chapter with was kind of a very quick, let's say, blurb on degrowth, so that I can situate this presentation in what degrowth is, in the sense of like what are the major critics that emerge from the framework of degrowth, and for that reason, just a second. I mean, there are perhaps just three facts that I want to start with, and now, in that sense, I'll be bringing up the broader picture. Like, we have an issue with economic growth on a global scale, and one of them has to do with planetary boundaries. And just to mention one of them, we know that we are already kind of 1.2 degrees above centigrade, above pre-industrial levels of temperature global warming. And if we carry on like that, we're going to be well ahead temperatures that could be easily adaptable. Not to say that sound catastrophic, but this has been heavily kind of dependent on economic growth and the way kind of it's been correlated actually with the growth of emissions. So you can see that also with the rest of the planetary boundaries. I mean, a second point when we think about economic growth and the reason for the growth has to do with economic inequalities, both within countries and internationally. You could see that there is also a correlation between global rates of economic growth and the way inequalities have been growing. You could see just these graphs down here. And then kind of a third reason why we need to really think the growth narrative has to do with the relationship between growth and well-being. I mean, it has been very clear that over the years, economic growth has not been improving well-being or so-called happiness over the years. So kind of put these apart. So kind of when we talk about growth and the growth imperative, perhaps the tourism sector is one of the perhaps most illustrative of the primary matter of tourism, with a primary matter of modern economies, which has to do with growth. And you could see actually the exponential growth that tourism has had on global level. Of course, you can see the kind of the sharp decline during the COVID period, but afterwards, tourism very safely recuperated. And that graph is particularly interesting because you could see that the growth of the tourist industry and the earnings of the tourist industry are actually outpacing a lot bigger than the growth of world economies. And that's actually the same for emissions. The emissions of global tourism have been growing a lot faster than emissions of the rest of the sectors. And just an illustration, between 2009 and 2019, the emissions of the sector, the tourism sector, have been as big as the one of Latin America and Caribbean together. So, and what we could see there is we could see how the trend of the growth of the sector is like pretty much correlated with the growth of the emissions. So the kind of the idea of greening that sector is becoming more and more scant or blurred. And you could see how actually the growth on carbon footprint emissions has been expanding a lot faster than the rest of the sector. So that's actually questioning any type of sustainability, so-called mainstream sustainability narrative for these industries, for this sector. So in that sense, when you think about sustainable green tourism, that's the very idea of greening tourism. It's kind of starting to fall apart, mainly because the entire sector, and when I talk about tourism, I talk about the entire sector, not about the kind of small community-based initiatives that are kind of earning their living from hosting visitors, right? We're talking about major touristified mass destinations. And we could see that these destinations have not been really able to decouple in any way, to decouple the growth of their incomes and visitors from their impact on space, on emissions, on bodies, on people being exploited at very low level, of salaries, of kind of damaging biodiversity, landscape, etc. So then kind of some people have been calling that peak tourism or kind of over tourism. But the major issues with tourism, and when I talk about tourism, I mean, here we talk about the critique of touristification as a process, not so much of massification of tourism, because that kind of has a particular type of sounding, which could be quite exclusive also. But this kind of the major issue with the tourism as a process is actually the way it commodifies spaces, the way it creates these kind of thematized areas. And that's kind of very much visible in the center of Barcelona, for example, how Barcelona has been branded, this particular type of brand, this particular type of mark that's been sold at markets, and that has been kind of presented as a kind of marketed product that's attracting millions of tourists. Yes.
You might be sharing, so you cannot see, but I just wanted to say that about 1.5 minutes left.
Okay, so kind of so in the context of this whole problem, we know that kind of there's precarity in the tourism sector has been incredible, especially in the context of tourism. I just want to share three numbers: 922, 655. 900 is kind of how much one hotel night in a very expensive hotel in Barcelona costs. 22 minutes is the minutes that a kind of a lady has to clean an apartment, and 655 is what she's paid for a full-time job in this kind of sector. So I'm gonna go directly to the very kind of to the social movement that's emerged in Barcelona and how it actually very naturally started kind of mobilizing the framework of degrowth. And the first thing about that framework, I'm gonna talk about that methodology a bit later, is that that's not a framework that perceives degrowth in only in quantitative terms. For that movement, and for many of the kind of people who define the movement, tourism degrowth, it's about social transformation. It's a kind of systemic transformation. It's not about only reducing the number of tourists and flights and cruise ships as well. It's about rethinking the entire system that has produced this particular type of dynamics in the first place. Yes.
Yeah, I see that you have 6 more slides, so maybe wrapping up in a few sentences.
I'm not gonna go over them. Yeah. So kind of the core meaning of tourism degrowth in this context has been about decommodification of the city, of the public space, of the protected areas, of housing, of the mobility of the landscape, and also defending the commons in terms of like defending transportation and natural parks. Also kind of it implies defending slow means of transport that has been public, boycotting airport and port expansion, repurposing tourism infrastructure from, let's say, from the Fira de Barcelona to a social housing. And also kind of there have been many proposals for cancellation of public support for the promotion of tourism, but also kind of measures for wider socio-ecological transformations, such as like wealth tax, working time reduction, universal basic income, especially for tourist workers, but also kind of deepening democracy in the sense of the way those affected by the touristic industry participate in decisions that imply the expansion or decline of tourism. And last thing, kind of transformation of tourism also implies also change of imaginary, which means like traveling less, traveling different, like rediscovering the local as something exotic as well, and they're questioning the very idea of touristifying, the whole idea of touristing or walking around the world and showing and kind of looking for the exotic as a kind of means to help alleviate oneself from the stress of daily life. I'll leave it here just for the sake of time, and I'll perhaps leave a few points for the discussion afterwards. I hope I was not a lot above my time.
No worries. Yes, thank you, Filka. Thanks for reminding us this important sector where we all have a role, I guess. So moving to Sarah's presentation. Sarah Holmgren works as a researcher in environmental communication at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences in Uppsala, Sweden. The floor is yours, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have any slides, so I'll just tell you a bit of the background to this chapter and what it is about. But first, I just want to say that it is a collaborative piece. There are several co-authors, Cecilia Lundin, Kristoffer Söderlund Kanarp, Ann Grundström, Stina Powell, and Cornelia Johansson. I just want to mention that. And shadow forests is a concept that we use in the chapter. And it comes from the feminist philosopher Val Plumwood's work on shadow places. And in short, shadow places are the places that provide our material and ecological support, but that in our rational culture are likely to elude our knowledge and responsibility. So we bring those ideas into the Swedish forestry context, and why we do that is because me and my co-authors have had many discussions around the feeling of wanting to go beyond critique and actually looking for the alternatives. And then in Val Plumwood's work, we found some guidance that we found resonated with our own sort of theoretical and methodological backgrounds. So in the chapter, we experiment with shadow forests as a concept and analytical framework with the aim of examining possibilities for a forestry that nurtures rather than erodes the forest ecosystems that supports us. And shadow forests are more than just the physical places that are unseen, forgotten, and damaged. They have deeper theoretical meaning. They are metaphorical in the sense that some ways of seeing, knowing, and relating to forest have been cast outside dominant reason. They're also literal. For example, below surface forest lives and processes are not as visible as those above ground. Shadows can also be strategic. Some things grow in the shadows and may not necessarily benefit from being illuminated and encountered. And shadow forests are also directional. They encourage us to think and act in new ways and to go beyond abstraction and pursue methods and collaborations that may be new to us and a bit uncomfortable. So based on Plumwood, we begin the chapter with a brief history of Sweden's industrial forestry. And we trace the ongoing social and ecological destruction of Sweden's forest landscapes to the early 20th century and the institutionalization of scientific forestry. And just for you who are not familiar with Sweden's forestry, it is Sweden is the land area of Sweden is covered with forest to about 70%, and 60% is managed intensively with the clear cut. So we have a very, or the industrial forestry has completely transformed Sweden's forest landscapes. And in the light of the climate and biodiversity crisis, there is not only a need to change to preserve other lives, but also to preserve human well-being. So the intersection of the climate and biodiversity crisis has sort of provided new fuel into the debate of Swedish forestry. In the chapter, we show how scientific forestry represents a rationalist culture that today manifests, of course, in the monoculture forest landscape, the materially, but also in resistance to adoption of less intensive management models and diversification efforts. And here we just want to go beyond the sort of immediate economic industrial interest to preserve status quo, but also to the sort of institutionalized norms and ideas that quite unreflectively are reproduced in various forest contexts. So to go beyond critique, we draw on a case study in the second part of the chapter to examine how social forest dimensions are understood and enacted in municipal forest management. And the management of municipal forest is a rather unknown terrain because it's trivial to industrial forestry. Yes. So the study is based on interviews with municipal forest managers, and they are structured around the experience and doings of everyday work and the meanings they ascribe to forests and social forest values and what they found most challenging and rewarding in their work. And just by looking at the category and of actors who have not been very much acknowledged, we identify stories that are quite different than those surfacing in the public debate. And in those stories, we see that human and non-human needs and desires are generally described in non-conflictual terms. And measures designed to increase biodiversity and accommodate different human needs are seen as synergetic. And the stories were very much about recognition and practical adjustment of forest management rather than sort of imposing a predetermined forest management model. So it was much more attentive. And we think that this story sort of softens this, what Plumwood refers to as hyper-separation between nature and culture. And we also conclude and argue that continued engagement with situated and communicative methodologies are important strategies for fostering sort of other cultures and that are underpinned by ideals of care and responsibility. So that was our chapter in short.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you all to the authors. And with this, again, we are moving into a short panel discussion. If you have any reflections on each other's, or if the other authors would like to pose any questions or comments to Sarah and Filka, please, this would be a good time to do so. And I would just like to say that Filka has provided us a deep and wide picture of tourism, and Sarah, you have also depicted us how forestry is on the verge of transformation. So, how do you see these different sectors? How do you see the people's role in transforming these sectors, which are quite central in the neoliberal capitalist systems that we live in? How do you see the transformations happening? And you have provided several examples already, so this can be one of the ways that we can jump in, or if you have any other reflections, feel free to as well.
Can I start?
Yes,
Go
ahead.
Well, I think our chapter, as well as the previous presentations, I think show the importance of going beyond critique and dominating ideas and actors, and also to pay attention to the how are people doing different, to the practices. And I think when we do look at those marginalized places, we can find sort of small pockets of resistance going on that have been there all the time, and that we can really learn from and so on. But that requires more work and effort from us researchers to actually identify those and engage with those people who don't have the resources and who struggle, as Galina said, in their everyday lives.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah.
If I may add on that,
please.
Basically, I personally don't see another means of transformation apart from people mobilization. I mean, as we have seen, kind of the major changes in kind of on the landscape, and the major transformations have been underpinned by mobilizations of different kinds that have gradually synced into the system or transformed the system. For example, in the context of Barcelona, I didn't manage to say that, but I was participant, activist practitioner, perhaps is the better way to say it, in the local assembly for touristic degrowth, and has been a movement that has been gradually growing from 2015 onwards, and has steadily supported more and more support by different neighborhoods and neighborhood organizations in Barcelona, also beyond, and actually spread throughout all South Europe. And there is now a network of Southern European cities for detouristification of spaces. And their voice has been becoming louder and louder, and actually it has been kind of manifesting a lot, kind of very strongly, the public and community discontent with the way territories are being kind of branded and turned into thematic parks. So it was only through this people pressure that particular type of policy proposals have been kind of put on the agenda of local municipalities, most of the time not very successfully, and not through measures that actually point towards authentic touristic degrowth, but actually you could see that that's kind of the core transformational channel through which tourism, degrowth could be actually put in practice. We have seen also kind of mass mobilization of the Canary Islands, with thousands of people going on the streets asking for change of model, and knowing that Canary Islands actually is living on tourism. So there is something going on that's kind of, there is some big discontent going on that's that's actually channelized and expressed through the people, through people uprising.
Thank you. Does anybody have any other reflections? If not, we can move to the next panel. Okay, so the final panel we are having is focusing on the policy, justice, and alliances. Again, another big dimension of the structural socio-ecological transformations. And we will start with Sabaheta. Sabaheta Ramcilovic-Suominen is an associate research professor of international forest policy and governance at Luke, Nature Resources Institute, Finland, and adjunct professor of global environmental justice at the University of Eastern Finland. Yes.
Justin, do you hear me? Do you see the slide?
Yes.
Perfect.
Both.
Can you please
Yes,
put 7 minutes for me, because I will.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll
thank
take
you.
the time.
Okay, I'll go on. So I'll present now the chapter 13 and 15. The chapter 14 is we couldn't have it into today book launch, unfortunately. So I will have 2 chapters in a row. Okay, so this one is about the EU green transition. It's the barriers for socio-ecological transformations, and especially about the de-radicalizing of some of the what we have been terming as concepts and ideas that are radically transformative, decoloniality, degrowth, justice, and so on. So let's move on. So I'll mostly talk about how the transformations have been analytically framed in this specific work, and then about the cooptation of the terms, or the de-radicalization, and then some of the barriers that the policy officers were highlighting as a reason why they cannot move on or initiate larger, more significant transformative change within the policies. And the chapter is based on 12 semi-structured interviews with the European Commission Brussels-based policy officers working on, bioeconomy related sectors, so many different sectors. And also it's based on a 2-day workshop with 21 participants, most of whom were the policy officers from the Commission again. But in that workshop, we had presentations about scholars from Degrowth. We have Georgios Kallis, myself, and others. So yeah, it's based on those things. So in terms of framing, so we use this definition of transformations, quite different from what I have been talking about transformations in the first book chapter, where I focused more on some other aspects. But nonetheless, it's defined as a counter-hegemonic process. So the hegemony and counter-hegemony is quite central. So process of, deconstructing, unlearning, undoing the dominant colonial and neo-colonial and capitalist extractivist structures and social relations. And then again, in terms of how, it's about those counter-hegemonic means and engagements which aim to bring about or to support post-colonial, post-capitalist, post-extractive or non-anti-extractivist radically just futures. So you may say that, of course, EU is embedded historically and currently in this colonial and neo-colonial and capitalist institutions and ideologies. It's like, no way, why would EU even, be interested or motivated to self-sabotage itself? But nonetheless, there are different reasons for this, and there is a wide dissatisfaction among people in Europe and abroad. The youth, especially in Europe, being dissatisfied with how the EU, but also broader Western liberal economic and political establishment have been, not handling the issues of the pressing socio-ecological urgencies and threats. crisis. So the EU is really compelled to engage with this language of change and transformations and so on. And there is also in the literature of socio-ecological transformations, there is this debate about whether or not the state and state policy and legislation should be part of the transformation. We should just go beyond state and abolish state and so on. So these are some of the framings where our chapter, my chapter, I always use this hour, doesn't matter, where the chapter wants to, contribute to a debate. So cooptation. So when I say cooptation, what I mean is basically this policy absorption of concepts and ideas that remain really at a rhetorical level, while the core logics of growth and domination and, really EU competitiveness and leadership and so on, very much, this neo-colonial approach are being preserved and sustained. So, for instance, we will see it's terms like transformations and even degrowth, which as the term was quite seen as a taboo. So they were advocating that we agree with what you are saying. Like they would agree with what Filka was saying, but they would say, let's call this differently. Let's call it uneconomic growth or, I don't know, regenerative growth. And these are just some examples which people wanted to use instead of degrowth as such. But the term of sustainable consumption as a synonym to this was discussed at the time. And yeah, like there was, I had many presentations about the colonial approaches, and there was this sort of recognition. Yes, this is relevant, but we are going to the will to improve was there. What I mean by that is that we will compensate approach, we will have governance instruments and principles in place and standards to ensure that we compensate for, life lost, basically. So that was,
you have 1 minute.
Oh, seriously? Great. So this new EU bioeconomy strategy is not part of the chapter, but I have it there just to say that it was just now adopted last 2 weeks ago. And it has been very disappointing, or it has proved me wrong about any hopes I have had that these debates that were at that time discussed were anyhow taken into consideration. Well, actually, 1 minute is fine. This is my last slide. Sorry, I a little bit lost what I wanted to say. So these are the barriers, some of the barriers that were given for why it's hard to initiate any transformative change. And you can read for yourself here what all was mentioned. But many of these, if not all, are really in the design of the policies and the EU institutions. So they are not, external issues. It's basically a design feature rather than a drift or incidence of in implementation as of why we don't see transformative change happening within the policies of the EU. So from here, our key to difficult science policy interface where scientists, researchers are supposed to simplify and narrow down the complex issues just in one sentence, in one slide. But there are also other things like geopolitics, war and growth of China, which were used to legitimize the approaches. And, many smaller things like bureaucracy and silo working and quantitative oriented or monitoring obsession, which is very narrow to really capture or allow people to work on other more important issues. Okay, so that was the first presentation. So I just go on with the next one.
Yes, please.
Oh, that is one slide left from Rilka. So this is the final concluding chapter, which is basically summarizing the book, and it's co-authored with Irmelin Gram-Hansen. And for those of you who were present in the Nordic Development Conference, I presented this book, so there will be some repetitions. So linking ideas and structures, building alliances for transformation. So there is a lot to summarize here. And the chapter try to bring the different, threads and the different practices and initiatives together. It basically cannot answer or doesn't aim to answer as such any questions or any like give responses, oh, this is the way, this is the blueprint, but hopefully pose ideas and foods for thoughts, inviting debate rather than closing the debate and providing responses. So I will, I will have some things will be repetitions from the book launch number 1. Just to reiterate and summarize, and other things will be a little bit like less said directly as in terms of summary, but we have heard in today's presentation those points. So this is how the chapter is structured, the justice being in the center, and then we address those other 3 or 4 points. And in interest of time, I'm going to proceed and touch upon some of these. So the first point is that ontologies structures. So this is basically reiteration of the point discussed during the first book launch, that ontologies and structures are 2 threads of the same fabric. And in the book, we introduce the ontology structures concept to point out that sort of interconnectedness, and that the economic and ecological social systems do not sit outside of us waiting to be fixed, and that they are rather co-constituted through our thinking and ways of being and showing up and acting. So changing the institutions, what that means, what we want to say is that without changing those underlying ontologies and values that normalize some of hierarchies and extractivism and separation, is basically would likely reproduce the very harms that are sought to be addressed or to be healed. And the Robin Wall Kimmerer's quotes from the book of Braiding Sweetgrass, I think, captures well this idea. So it's sort of where she says, restoring land without restoring relationship is an empty exercise. It is relationship that will endure and relationship that will sustain that restored land. So that was number 1. Second point is the justice being at the center of the transformations, these debates. So I think this is relevant to highlight because we know that coloniality, modernity constantly appropriate and dilute terms and ideas, as I just discussed in the previous chapter. So centering, therefore, this intention in justice is key. So multi-species, different dimensions of justice, some of which we may discuss whether they are in tension with each other. So that's a relevant point to think about. But also in the chapter, we have emphasized that there is the importance of positioning indigenous, relational, and also non-dual ontologies and philosophies as equal onto epistemic systems alongside the one world or the modernity coloniality, the Western system of ontological and epistemic system, but also the holders of those systems as equal players in science and policy making, and that just to highlight that this positioning should strengthen rather than weaken the colonial and climate and other injustices, and not strengthen injustices, sorry, but should help and strengthen the calls for justice and reparations. And so the number 3, pluriverse. Let me know, Esin, when I'm 2 minutes.
Yeah. 2 minutes.
Good. So the pluriverse, we haven't directly, because there is really a lot written already. So we haven't engaged this in most of the chapter, but in the last, in most of the other book chapters, but apart maybe of Ashish having that quite strongly there. But we can see that it is really relevant theme in all of them. So the pluriverse, the many worlds that exist there, but are not that are obscured by the one world or the coloniality, modernity. So we ask here, how can we dismantle the domination when we actually actively participate in it? So how do we dismantle the for instance, the epistemic hierarchies that deem some of the other ways of knowing and being as backward or irrelevant, or culture, tradition that's not knowledge, and so on. When we work and participate in institutions and basically the system that upholds such views. So all these, questions that we don't have an answer with, but we pose it as an important thing to think about. But nonetheless, kind of that we must engage into deconstructing and sitting with these uncomfortable questions and try to go beyond the discussion and beyond the rhetorical and beyond the philosophical as a lived practice. So in parallel with confronting this at the discursive level, really we need to somehow recognize our own complicities and in reproducing the violence and practice this being differently if we are to really challenge the domination. And I guess I am, this is the last slide, just to highlight the need to build solidarity and alliances across differences and tensions. So we have different movements and worldviews and different approaches. To what extent, what is solidarity in this context? Is it, we argue that it's not only about erasing tensions, but holding and navigating them in ways that allow for different understandings and realities to emerge. But to what extent does this go? And is sometimes solidarity also saying no to movements that are directly working to promote the oppression or violence that we want to see addressed. So this just the closing invitation to end up with an invitation to sit with these questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabaheta. And with this, we have a very nice conceptual, theoretical, and also very synthetical conclusion to the book. And this has been a journey that we started with Ashish's very grounded cases of alliance building and the global tapestries, forming global tapestries, and we moved across geographies and across different levels of community recreating life. Maybe I can summarize that way. But so this is.
May I suggest something?
Yes,
sorry,
please.
I seem to intervene. May I suggest that in interest of time, we just open the discussion for anyone, everyone, that we don't go directly to this last one person panel.
I was just, I had actually moved to that. So because there's no one that you can discuss with. So we can open this now floor to the final section of our event today, which is the audience exchange and your general comments. And we had a question from Vivian about researcher or giving back to the community. How do you bring your findings back to the community? So, and in the chat, there has been some responses to that. So if you have anything to add, please go ahead. But otherwise, the floor is open to your general comments, questions, reflections, and we start with Filka. Go ahead.
Thank you, Giselle, and thank you, Saba, for the for the presentations. Actually, I had a question on your chapters that are very exciting and very relevant also to the work that I'm currently doing it within the merge projects. What is one of these Horizon Europe projects that are looking at the way to measure societal progress beyond GDP. And actually kind of what you shared is very much along the lines of what we've been finding. But still, I would like to push to challenge you a little bit on that, because, for example, the Commission has been developing this, I mean, very small fraction, very marginalized, very back office use term, sustainable and inclusive well-being, in which there are elements of degrowth, there are elements of post-growth, there are elements of, I don't know, whatever call it, which is based on trying to measure and imagine societal progress very differently along a very wide range of indicators. Perhaps you're aware of that. But it's kind of sadly, this kind of pretty progressive measure has been intentionally pushed back, because because it's not really compatible with the latest competitiveness compass, right? After the Draghi report, we know that the kind of European Union Commission made a huge shift towards competitiveness, understood as small growth, understood as kind of industrial competition, understood as industrial innovativeness, has pushed back a lot on all green targets. Actually, I mean, someone would argue that the Green Deal, the European Green Deal, is dead. What you have now is the Clean Industrial Mechanism, the Clean Industrial Act, whatever. So actually, for me, what I've discovered also for engagement with people from the policies, sorry to be kind of so specific, is that kind of there's some very specific people that are very radical and very kind of open-minded and wanting to push pretty radical change at the level of the Commission, but they're kind of relegated very back seats. And they're kind of very much pushed back, because actually, if you start measuring the economy, I don't know, in terms of kilos of energy being like kilos of sand or rare materials being moved, or gigawatts of electricity being measured, then it's not going to be real growth that you kind of strive for, but perhaps some sort of balancing out. So I mean, the issue of metrics is kind of tricky. Yeah, that's kind of more or less.
Yeah, I guess I would bring 2 points up. So yes, partly why I was saying there was the hope when I went there, and it was my first time, doing research fieldwork in the Commission in Brussels. I was like, oh my God, they are not objecting what we are saying. This is great, and people, and you had a few individuals. Usually they were, what we would call emerita in universities. So they have been there for a long time. So they have some role, but not really big role. Or then they have some small initiative, which gets like a portion of money compared to the mainstream teams. So there are those pockets of radical changes. We have the EU staff for climate justice, which is usually either very old or young generation in it. Anyway, yes, to that, I recognize it. Specifically, I was focusing on bioeconomy. Bioeconomy strategy came out. I didn't read it word to word, but I did scroll and analyze and put some read commentaries. We have gone way back. There's nothing about sustainable. What was this about?
Sustainable
the growth
inclusive,
production, like. So there are some environmental issues there, like how do we become more less resource consuming, but very framed in a way we don't won't consider consideration. So that was one point. The second one, I mean, still, like when you say the Green Deal is dead, I mean, I am not sad, because in my view and the framing of transformations, the Green Deal, EU Green Deal was really not what I would consider transformative. But unfortunately, it's dead for different reasons, not because something more genuine and benign is being created, but because we have gotten back to the pure imperialist way of doing business and competing and running or well, you know what I mean. So yeah, there are initiatives in the chapter. I bring that, and that more those nuances are there, and with some of them I'm still in contact. So there's a lot of interesting things going on, but it's on the margins.
Thank you. Ketaki, you had a question or a comment. Would you like to raise it?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I would like to go back to what Vivian had mentioned about taking the findings to the community. So to talk about that, because the way we practice is we have been deeply engaged with the community through a participatory approach. And this participatory approach also includes not just conducting workshops to understand the concerns or issues or building solutions or ideas, but it also involves a lot of participation in terms of conducting exhibitions and where we actually display these findings of whatever research is being done. And that also creates a platform to get feedback from the community on those findings or on the action-based research that we've been doing, their feedback, their opinions, then it's a way of validating, evaluating constantly, and it's more of a like a circular process. I mean, it is never a linear process where you only do participation and lead to further activities. It is a circular process where you constantly um, evaluate the process and get back to research. So that is which happens through multiple mediums of participation. So that is what ideally is what the approach that we really see in our book.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
integrating the dialogue from the design, from the very beginning in the design. Yes, thank you. Any other comments? Any places where you see this book impacting change or this or the 10-year future of this book, for instance? How do you see your contributions? Any sorts of future directions?
I think it's our going a little bit already over time. Like we're also quite tired, maybe.
Yeah. But Ashish has a comment, I guess. Do you want to?
No. I was just going to ask whether the book would be available as open source at some point.
It's open source.
It is already open. Yes. Okay.
It is
Sorry,
already
I'm
open source,
following
yeah.
all the. Yes.
Yeah.
Good. No, so I that's also very much part of this discussion, right? How to make sure that any of our research outputs, publications are available beyond, because mostly the sort of established publisher prices are way beyond what most people can afford. So yeah, thanks,
Yes.
Saba, that you made sure that it's open source.
Yes. Yeah, thanks. That of course is was planned from the beginning, because publishing with Routledge means 150 euros a book, which is beyond, and not just because of that, but it really is important. It's also part of that accessibility and epistemic justice to a small, even if degree. I think maybe there's no more questions. We can wrap up.
Yeah, I'm amazed to see how different what kind of a diversity of contributions this book and you as the editor has been able to bring together. Even considering the previous launch and this launch, it seems like there are a lot of paths of inspiration, solidarity, alliance, co-creation that this book seems to be a good example of, and it will be really great to see similar works like that also going beyond the book structures. So many thanks to the contributors, and also yeah, and for those of you who have missed the beginning, this launch event will be published on the project website, Just Globe project website. So
Sarah has final words.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you for organizing this, because it was really nice to listen to the other authors of the other chapters, and now I really feel looking forward to reading the chapters in depth, because there are so many linkages, although they're very different contexts. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you, everyone, from my side as well. This has been a project that, goes long term and puts some time during the normal project work, but I have really enjoyed it. And basically the whole idea that it came together was not clear to me, or it has changed from the initial idea where I had back in 2 years ago. And then when I saw the contributions coming, I realized some things that, oh, this is really interesting. So let's in the introduction and the closing, I specifically wanted to emphasize this the institutional and the ontological being so much intertwined, and that we have to act on both, which is very obvious at some level, but not that present or normal or common or a norm in the socio-ecological transformations literature. So basically those contributions brought up that insight. It came out in the process, not something that I had clear from the beginning. So thanks for that. Right.
Okay.
Perfect. I hope we stay in contact and we follow on each other's initiatives. I feel free to always get in contact.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
a lot.
you so much,
everyone.
Thank you
Thanks
so much,
a lot.
Sabata, for everything.
I will
Thank you
stop
for everything.
recording.
Yeah.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye bye. Thank you.